Make ourselves forces for good.
Mom, if I'm going to write these things, I should really be writing them in the sand, because I'm very afraid of this diary being found. But I want to have it for later. The changes in my head are happening so fast that I want to keep track of them, except that words don't seem to go fast enough. That letter I mailed you today was full of lies. No, not lies. It just can't tell you what it's like. That TV news that you saw me on. That was a little town. One of dozens we've liberated, and you should see the natives getting all their possessions into a bundle in just minutes, and then pile the bundle on their head and run through the streets whenever we or the comms start closing in. They should be good at evacuating by now, I guess, because it is important to remember. It is very important to remember that this little country has been the battleground for 10,000 years for every culture that has arisen to dominate the world. That is why it is so important that the United Nations finish the job this time, so that we can put an end to war.
I knew a boy once who could count raindrops, he said. No one could refute him on that. He was a director. He had the audience at a one show crawling on all fours. And when they got into the pitch black theater, they were hit in the face with a big sack of them. You probably saw it. Yes, I was in it, I think. I'm not sure. I've been in so many shows now where the audience crawled in on all fours and was hit in the face with a sack full of something. This one got a bad review. I don't know why. One never knows why. The same critic had given the show raves the other 12 times I was in it. I mean, it was just as experimental as it ever was. He inspired confidence in this boy. The raindrop watcher. Of course, anybody can nowadays. People are so ready to believe anything you tell them. For instance, if I were to tell you that I wasn't always like this, you'd probably believe me, wouldn't you? You would? But only on the condition I'm willing to believe that you weren't always the way you are. Okay? It's a deal. I believe you were different. I believe everything was different once. I believe it was the same once, too. That's all I know to believe in now, that everything happens again and again in great logarithmic cycles. Like psychedelic swallows returning to corporeal capistranos, or like water sloshing back and forth for all eternity in some sort of celestial bathtub. Isn't that a hell of a thing to believe in, even now?
I couldn't go on working in that kind of job anymore after it happened. I remember the next night, walking along Broadway, how weird it was to see the theaters all closed, and all these hundreds of color photographs of JFK in all the store windows. You know, someone must have made a fortune selling those photos. They were everywhere instantly. Or maybe people had them all along and you just didn't know. The sun had begun to eclipse. People were staggering around the city. Really, they looked lost and hopeless, like people after an atomic attack in the movies. And everybody was scared at first. Scared that it was the beginning of a chain of assassinations or a war. But by the next day, no one was afraid anymore. That had passed. It had become just disbelief. In St. Patrick's Cathedral, well, outside, I never got in, there were so many people. Hundreds of thousands of people were saying prayers for him. The whole world had loved him, you see, so much. The entire human race went into mourning. Kings and queens came to his funeral. All the TV stations had the same thing on for 4 whole days. They even gave us the day off to watch.
I wanted to be beautiful. I was. I am. I wanted to be kind. I didn't think I'd ever be anything less. I wanted to be fun. You tell me. I dress well. I've got a good figure. I've always been good at making any old thing look chic. I've got a witty little line of polite chat that nevertheless never fails to reveal a terrible vulnerability underneath. And I'm smart. I had before me the whole chart of Marilyn's mistakes. I could guide myself by her and avoid the pitfalls that befell her. I had it knocked. I could even act. I knew writers, painters, photographers. I was liberated. I liked men. I liked a couple of them a lot. I knew how to manipulate them. I set out with a ruthless plan to do men good. There was only one thing that I failed to take into account. And that was that, what with the various film journals, movie magazines, newswire services, television documentaries, re-release facilities, celebrity postcards, calendars and endorsement ads, memorabilia shops, movie still collectors, fan clubs, scrapbook keepers, pin-up enthusiasts, gossip columnists, biographers, and original soundtrack recordings. There are about 50 million people exactly like me. 50 million little media manufactured racial subconsciousnesses that had systematically, for at least my 17 years of earthly existence, been subjected as nearly as conglomerate marketing practices could swing it to precisely the same arrogant, idealistic input as me. And the day after Marilyn died, 50 million little boys and girls rose up with one overweening, irresistible, and indefatigable ambition: to be the next Marilyn Monroe. And every dirty old man, cross-eyed agent, horny hairdresser, figure-fucking photographer, plastic playwright, demented director, urgent acting teacher, many-handed manager, oral office boy, anal choreographer, phallic vocal coach, orgiastic dress designer, and every other form of unlaid, opportunistic, slimy, scaly, sleazy son of a bitch in this nation's great metropolitan casting centers suddenly found him or her or themselves deluged under 10 million tons of automated, undulating, available, eager,